So I'll just check my phone. Okay, so we're all good to go. Hi everyone, thanks for joining in. Gillian Harvey has joined us again, so great to have you again, Gillian. It's great when we have authors back again.
It's lovely to be here.
So for those that don't remember Gillian from last time, just a little bit about her. So she's been writing stories since she could hold a pen and finished her first novel at 24, but it took her a while to get it off the slush pile. She worked as a teacher for 9 years in the noughties before moving to France with her husband Ray and starting a family, and she now has 5 children, so that certainly must have kept you busy. She's able to find more time to write now and started freelancing for magazines and newspapers. Throughout, she's always had a novel on the go, and finally in 2016, she started writing Everything is Fine. At the time, she had postnatal depression and needed a project to focus her mind on. In 2018, she finally got an agent. In early 2019, she signed a book deal with Orion. Everything is Fine came out during the peak of the pandemic in May 2020. So she didn't have a launch she envisaged, but she made some wonderful friends online who've been great supports to her. And she's also got more confident in doing lives on Facebook and Instagram. So Perfect on Paper is her newest novel, and that's about feeling invisible and unappreciated. Claire, the protagonist, is great at her job and being a mother to her 2 children. So great that no one really notices her. So I think a lot of mothers would certainly relate to that. She resolves to do something about it and definitely succeeds. It's been described as a humorous, empowering, and relatable, and and it was released in May 2021. And you're currently working on your 3rd novel. So thanks so much for joining us again. Is there more you'd like to tell us about Perfect on Paper?
Well, yeah, I mean, really it came about, it's a little bit inspired by kind of real life, the whole idea of women feeling a little bit invisible as they get older. So that kind of idea is always around, isn't it? And then as my children got older and needed me a little bit less, you suddenly realise that you're talking to them and they're not listening to a word you say sometimes. And you think, hang on a minute, this isn't, I think you're the centre of their world for so long. And then they kind of blank you out when they're looking at the telly or whatever they're doing. And I started to think, what would I have to do for them to notice me right now? What would I have to say? And it kind of came from that idea, that this idea of this woman who is just not noticed because nothing's going wrong in her life, nothing's sort of terrible, so things are ticking on, but she just feels completely undervalued. And yeah, I mean, Claire, the protagonist in Perfect on Paper, is not your typical. I got a little bit tired of in some novels this idea of women who keep getting everything wrong and they're a disaster, and I think, well, that's not, most women I know are juggling so many balls and keeping them all in the air somehow, and they might feel a bit like a disaster sometimes, but actually they're really, really doing a great job. And that's what I wanted to bring out about Claire as well, that she's actually really, really successful. It's just she's made herself, I think I describe her a bit like a cog in a machine rather than the main part. So she's whirring away and everyone takes her for granted. So she does something about it.
And when you were writing the book, did you decide to try anything to try and make your children notice you?
No, it was more an imagination thing, I think, for this one. I had fun thinking what would actually make them sit up and take notice. But with Claire, it extends out to her husband doesn't really see her, her colleagues at work don't really, her boss doesn't see all the great work she's doing. So it's sort of that situation to the extreme. So I thought more about that side of her, and then it came out that, you know, the rest of the family start taking notice too. But in my own way, I sometimes say something silly to the children, or I'll say something chocolate, and they'll go, chocolate, and suddenly you think, oh, okay, so you are listening, you're just not interested in what I'm saying. So yeah, I do the odd thing like that, but they're pretty good most of the time, and it's nice to, in a way, it's nice to be less needed, because suddenly you think, oh my goodness, I can actually sit down for 5 minutes and no one's going to grab me. So there is that.
And especially, I think you must have had a very, very busy life with your children growing up, with having 5 children. How old are they now, your children?
They're still, I mean, they're still young. So the youngest is 6
Okay.
now, and I've got an 8-year-old girl, 2 9-year-old boys, and an 11-year-old girl. So it's pretty full on, but they're all at the stage where they can go in the garden. I don't have to watch them all the time. I have to be aware of what they're doing, but before you're just sort of watching the concrete steps all the time in case the baby crawls out, and it takes up more of your time than you actually realise, because you're hyper vigilant all the time, aren't you? Even you're having a cup of tea with your friend in the garden, you know where everyone is, and that's been a relief to know that they can pretty much get on with most things without me hovering. But there is that downside where you suddenly think, oh, they don't think the sun shines out of me anymore.
Yeah. They're still quite young though. How do you find time to write?
Basically, for me, it's quite compulsion to write. So I would find the time no matter what, I think. So even when they were really young, when I wrote Everything Is Fine, we were really in the thick of it, really, with the children. So my youngest was just coming up to 1, I think, when I started that, and I just needed something. So I basically said to Ray, my husband, we'll get them all to bed, but there always needs to be someone kind of on duty with kids of that age. There'll be someone up, but he was kind of assumed control of the situation from 7 till 8, and I would just write. And I think that helped me to really stick to it, because I knew that if I didn't take that little window of time, then I wouldn't have anything. Now it's easier because they're at school, although with coronavirus and things, we've been at home and at school a little bit, but I find time to tuck myself away, and it's not a strict routine, but when I suddenly realise everyone's fallen silent and they're all doing something, I'll get to my PC quick.
Yeah. You take your opportunities when you can.
Yeah, and I think with writing, when it's creative writing, because obviously I do a little bit of writing for work as well, but when it's the creative writing, my brain is still as long as I'm doing a little bit every day, my brain's figuring out a lot of stuff in my subconscious, so I sit down and it will just come out, really. So I think it is something you can do when you're cooking or whatever, because your brain, someone's squirreling away in there and doing it for you almost.
And we've got a few people watching, which is great, and some questions coming in. So just reminding anyone, if you've got a question for Gillian, please type them in comments. Sharon's wondering how long it took you to write your latest book.
That's been really interesting. So my latest book I wrote, it was the quickest book I'd ever written. It took me about 10 weeks to get the first draft out.
Oh, wow.
And and I was really, and I think it's part of the reason is just knowing that someone is definitely going to want to read it. My agent, at the very least, is going to want to read it. So there's a good incentive there. But also, it's the first time I really planned something in a lot of detail, which I hadn't done before, and I found that was quite good. But then I've revisited it and I've worked in some more characters. So off and on, I suppose, it's probably taken about 4 or 5 months. And I think that's probably average for me for a book. So it's gone a different way this time, but it ended up being the same result, I guess.
And how long ago did you have the thought for that book?
I think that's quite interesting. So the one I've just finished just recently, probably it's been in, because the one I'm working on after Perfect, the one I've just done, is a lot about mental health and things like that. There's people with different problems in it, and I suppose going through life, you have your own experiences, and you also pick up on other people's experiences. So as far as I always knew, I wanted to address that at some point in a book, and it just became the right time. So yeah, I think in terms of actually writing it, it came to me very, very suddenly out of the blue. But when I had written it and I was looking at it, I was thinking, oh, I must have been thinking about that when I was 30 and doing this, because that's kind of come from there. And so yeah, it's weird, but it all came together in an instant thought. But it was a long time coming at the same time. If that makes sense.
And we spoke to you before when Everything Is Fine came out, and
Yeah.
you were doing a lot of Facebook Lives for launching that book. Has anything changed with Perfect on Paper? Have you been able to do anything different?
Yes, I think because I had more of a, when Everything Is Fine came out in May 2020, no one had adapted to this new way of living, and there were a few things that I think made it extra difficult. And one was that it was a humorous book, and at the time people were feeling quite serious, I think, about things. They wanted to so kind of, it seemed really bad taste to be going, hey, I've written a really funny book, and everyone's like, we've got a pandemic going on, you know. But I think also what's been really lovely is that I've had more time to connect with bookshops in the UK and elsewhere, and I didn't do that last time. Like retrospectively a little bit, but I thought I was going to be over. I had a bookshop with proper live launch planned, and I was going to go around and visit bookshops when I was in the UK, because I live in France. And this time I kind of accepted that even if things were getting better, there was no way I was going to be able to go and have a real in-person event. So I've arranged more things with bookshops, which has been really nice. So I felt a bit more part of things. So I did my book launch with an independent bookshop in the UK, and I've got another event coming up next month with a different independent bookshop. And it's just having that connection that makes you feel, oh, I'm actually an author. It's real. I didn't just make it up in my head during this kind of pandemic madness or anything like that. It really is happening. So that's been nice. And I suppose finally it's just connecting with other authors, particularly a group I'm in. We call ourselves the D20 authors because we all debuted in 2020, and I've worked with some of those people, and we've supported each other, and I think that's been invaluable. And I didn't have it as much before my last book. It sort of came about during that time, so I felt a bit more grounded and a bit more part of things, even though I haven't been anywhere or done anything in reality, I guess.
Yeah. And both your books are quite, like, even though they've got humour in them, they talk about things that are a lot of women and mothers and their experience in their lives. Have you found a lot of readers reach out to you and say that things have really, touched them, or?
It's really interesting because I think they've both got this undertone of things, maybe a little bit of how society treats women, or the poisonous side of social media and that kind of thing. Some people read them and say, oh, it was a really funny book, it's great. And then some people really read them almost on a different level and really pick up on all those nuances. And that's really lovely when people kind of reach out and say that they've really recognised themselves in it, or say, oh, it's really, some people say, for example, Everything Is Fine, it's sort of out there slapstick humorous, and some people have done it's so true to life. So it's got those different elements depending, I guess, on what your experiences are and who you are. So those people that have reached out and said that, it's been really nice, because you think, yeah, someone actually saw me within that book.
And Anne's asked something that I was thinking as well. She's wondering if you can tell us anything about your next book.
I can tell you that it's not as humorous as my previous books, but it does still have humour in, because what I wanted to do is, I think there's still a lot of stigma about mental health problems, and yet the more you dig in the more you get to know people, everyone's had their share of ups and downs, you know, on a small level or a bigger level. And one of the biggest things for me, I suffered from terrible anxiety when I was in my 20s. That was the worst time for me. And I'm 43 now, and I think even then, even 20 years ago, the idea of even saying mental health problem was really taboo, and it's got better. But I think I wanted to make it ordinary. I wanted to make it part of people's lives, that they were having ordinary lives and they were having sometimes funny things happen, but they also had this part to them, and bringing that more to the fore and normalising it more. So hopefully that's what it does, and it looks at different. The other thing that's different about it is it's got more than one narrator this time. So I've got a main character, and then I've got these other characters that pop up and have their own chapters and things, which is something I've really enjoyed and haven't done before to this extent. So it's been a really nice process, and I feel almost like it's the next stage for me in terms of my writing. Like it's still got the kind of light touch and humour, but it's brought a more emotive side to it as well, I hope.
And will that book be out next year?
I don't know yet.
Okay.
So at the moment it's with my editor, and obviously, but I would hope that it will be out sort of early next year.
Yeah. So are you someone who has lots and lots of ideas of lots of books going forward in your head?
Yeah, I've always been an ideas type person, and they do kind of. I think once you have an idea of what people are looking for, so what your editor kind of wants you to write, you get a little bit more shoehorned into a position. But I'm always someone who's latching onto things and thinking that's interesting, and they get worked into a book eventually. So it might not be the whole concept of the book, but I've usually got some ideas on the go, and sometimes it will start with just an idea of an image of something. I'm starting to sort of think about this idea of for another potential novel, and it starts off with a woman punching someone in the face, but she didn't know she was going to do it, and because she just reached that point where all the things in her life are crowding in on her, and she's this person who would never ever do that, and she does it, and it kind of unravels a lot of things in her life. So I had this idea of this unassuming person just kind of suddenly cracking, and what would happen. So that's the kind. I don't know where that's going yet, but that's where I'm thinking for the next one. It's gonna. So I've always got something, I guess, chewing around in my brain somewhere.
And what about research? Do you have to do much research for your books?
Not huge amounts, and I think that is partly because I got published later on rather than earlier on. So I've had lots and lots of life experiences, and I've had people around me have life experiences. And I've also worked quite a few different jobs. I've worked in offices as a kind of legal secretary and the teaching, and I've also done a little bit of counselling and various things. So far, I've not had to do too much research, but I think that will come. The latest book, a little bit more, because of the wanting to get things right in terms of the mental health and the help available and that kind of thing. But I've got my own experiences with that too. So a lot of it just comes from me. But I know that I think I might have exhausted all my former workplaces now in my book, so I might have to do a bit more for the next one. But
Anne's wondering if you note down all the ideas as they come into your head.
No, but I should. I really should. I find that the best ideas come to me when it's the most inopportune time. So when I was at uni and I'd be thinking about an idea for an essay I was working on, I used to run a lot then, and I'd be at the furthest point from home, and my brain would just go ping, here's the answer, and I'd have to try and keep it in my head all the way home. And I think that's, for me, it's just like I have to try and remember things, or I'll tell my husband, or if something really good comes up, and sometimes I'll scribble them down. But the problem is I'm a bit kind of scatterbrained, and I end up with like lots of different notebooks and different to-do lists and one to-do list will say, don't forget the other to-do list, and that kind of thing. So I try, and I really need to invest in a tiny notepad and have it in my pocket at all times, but so far I've not been organised enough.
And with your you said before that you'd started writing earlier, but it took a while to get published.
Yeah.
When you were younger, did you think you were going to become a writer?
I knew I wanted to. I think when I was very young, I thought I would, because you just think, when you're young, you think, I'm going to be this, and you don't know of the obstacles in your way, do you? And then I think as I moved into my teens and stuff, people who were advising me, like careers advisors, teachers, and just living in life and seeing what it's really like, I realised that I suppose I had to see it as something I hoped for, but it couldn't be my career plan. I sometimes wonder, I did ask my parents if I could have a year between uni and teacher training to write my novel, and they're like, you can write your novel around the side of teacher training. So I think there's always, parents obviously, they just want you to be okay, don't they? And so they didn't mean it in a negative way, but you have to really believe in yourself, I suppose, to stop doing whatever you're doing and say, I am going to be a writer. And I do know people who've done that, and I'm always so impressed by them. But yeah, I always knew that's what I wanted. I wasn't always sure that it was going to happen.
And how did you go about getting your first book to get published?
So I'd written a few books by that point, so I was quite used to sending things off to agents, and I'd buy, in the UK there's a book, it's probably a similar one where you are, but the Writers and Artists Yearbook, and you get this great big book, and it's a directory really of what agents are looking for. And even when the internet came along, I still preferred to have the book. It was, I don't know, some sort of proof that I was doing something. And so I just would send off to agents. My problem is, I think, or has been in the past, that I would give up too soon, because now I know that people submit to 20, 30, 40 agents, and I would do like 10 and say, well, no one likes it. But there was one agent on the novel I wrote before Everything Is Fine who rejected it, but said she really wanted to see anything else I write in the future. And I wrote back in a very needy way and said, does that mean you think I've got what it takes? And she said, I think you have that something. And that was enough to sustain me for my next novel. And then I just sent it to her, and she was the one that took me on. So it's funny really, isn't it, when things happen, they don't seem like things that you think will never happen. And when they do happen, it's just like that, isn't it? Just, and it seems like it was no effort at all, but obviously there's a lot on the back of it.
Yeah. And the novels that you've written before, the scripts you've written before, do you think you'll ever go back and try and get them ready to be published more, or?
I feel like I mean, I would have hated to know it at the time. If I knew when I wrote my first novel that I'd write like 5 or 6 more before I'd get published, I would have been overwhelmed. But now they're written by a younger version of me, and I think, especially as writers, we grow, don't we? And we sort of, well, it's just about life experience. I think it's not what I want to say so much now. I can see, I've had some of them printed up just for me when I was, you can just order one copy from these places. So I've done that, and so I've got them. And I sometimes look at a page to see, and I think that's not bad actually, but the world's moved on and I've moved on, I think, since writing them. So
yeah.
No.
Have you taken anything though out of them, or taken any characters out of them and put them in the ones that have been published?
Not knowingly, but I think when I look back, I realise there are themes and there are tendencies of characters to do certain things and settings that I have recycled without really thinking about it. And I think what's really interesting is the novel that's still in the pipeline at the moment. I wrote a similar book to it, now I think about it, in about 2010, and it was about 4 different people who got on a train, and like an incident happened on the train and how it affected all their lives in positive and negative ways. And some of the people in that had mental health problems. And I do wonder whether the world wasn't quite ready for it then, and maybe a bit more now. I think we're all a lot more open now. So, yeah, I think definitely have, but never on purpose.
Yeah, yeah. Kelly's wondering if you have a favourite character that you've created.
I think, I think probably it's quite normal for authors to sort of be in love with their current character. And I think Claire in Perfect on Paper I really like, because not right at the beginning when she's sort of a little bit of a doormat, but how she changes her life and becomes more brave and kind of knits two sides of her life together at the end. I really like her because she's really steps out of her comfort zone, and in a way that I think, maybe not exactly the way that she does in the book, but I think we all feel sometimes that we could be a bit braver, and what would happen to me if I was a bit braver, if I did do that thing that I'm frightened of. So I really like her. And I like some of my funny characters. I suppose Hugo, the eccentric artist in Everything is Fine, I really like. And in Perfect on Paper, I kind of like her boss, even though he is not a great person, he was fun to write because he's totally taken in by his sort of young protege and gets into all this new age business stuff, and that's quite fun. So it's enjoyable. I don't think I'd like to meet him, but
Yeah. Sharon's wondering if you have a favourite author.
It's almost great that you asked that, because I've done a few sort of interviews over the last little while, and I've sort of brought up some of my favourites: David Nichols, Nick Hornby, that kind of thing, and I completely forgot Sue Townsend. So she is just, I love Sue Townsend. I didn't read the Adrian Mole Kid Diaries, but her grown-up Adrian Moles are just hilarious and so well observed. And I've also, one of my favourite books is a collection by her, which is something like Confessions of a Middle-Aged Woman. And what it is all her columns she did for Sainsbury's magazine in a book. And the way she looks at things is just amazing, and so funny, but also so well observed. One of them is she's just watching this luggage handler out of the window when she's on a plane, and he's putting the case in, and one of them falls out, and is he going to notice? And his head starts blowing. It's just, she creates this whole almost sitcom scenario from this one observation. So yeah, Sue Townsend's definitely up there.
Yeah, I didn't realise she'd read. I've read all of her Adrian Mole, but I didn't realise she wrote. So, what one would you recommend to read first if you haven't read any of her adult ones?
I would go for Adrian Mole and the Weapons of Mass Destruction.
Okay.
Because it's so funny,
I'll
and
have to have a look at that one.
It's basically one of the central themes that runs through it is Adrian has booked a holiday somewhere, and I think it was Cyprus or something, and he cancelled it because of the kind of threat of weapons of mass destruction and the Iraq War. That's all going on at the time of the book, and he keeps writing, but they won't give him a refund of his deposit unless he proves that there are weapons of mass destruction. So he keeps writing to Tony Blair and saying, "Can we have proof of these weapons of mass destruction?" I just think that's just brilliant. So there's a lot of that kind of subversive humour going on. It's really funny. I actually listened to it on audiobook, and it was really well narrated on audiobook, so I really recommend that.
Okay, I'll have to have a look at that one. And could you tell us, is there anything you've been reading lately that you'd like to recommend to us?
Yes. What have I read the, I can't think of her name. It's called The Rearranged Life of Una someone or other. I can't remember her surname. I'll find it out and I'll pop it in the chat later. But I quite like time travel books, not science fiction-y ones, but things like The Time Traveller's Wife. And this is another one of that, in that kind of vein, where this girl on her 18th birthday, she is transported into a different version of herself. So she's 50, and then she goes to a different age and a different age. It's all about this clash between who she's inside and who she's on the outside. And I just love the idea of time travel. It was in one of my earlier books, which never got anywhere, but this idea of, can we change time? Does what we do affect things, and all of that? I really enjoyed that. And I'm reading at the moment Adele Park's Just My Luck.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I'm really enjoying it so far.
Thanks for those recommendations. And have you got any tips for any aspiring authors?
Definitely. I think, first of all, some people plan and some people don't. And if you find that you're someone that can't plan, that's always been me in the past. And I think it's because you can imagine a whole story, but it's hard to imagine all the little things that happen on that way when it's got to be so long, and that can be overwhelming. So how I used to do it before, I think I can hold a novel in my head better now. Now I've written a couple. But how I used to do it was I used to write the first chapter, see if it's got legs, and then I'd plan 3 or 4 chapters ahead of myself, write those, see where it was going, plan. So maybe do some sort of incremental planning, and also just don't let nobody actually feels, well, very few people actually feel like a writer, even when they're published. So in terms of, don't let your inner doubt about yourself stop you doing it, because your writing is just as kind of viable and valuable as anyone else's, and you're the only person that can write that particular book, because everything you are goes into your books. And I think, it's just keep putting yourself out there, because if not, someone else is going to do it, and they'll have your life then. So believe in yourself if you can.
And is there anything that you found from writing your first book to your second book that's been published that you found that you shouldn't have done, or that you didn't in the next one, or that you didn't do that you did do in the next book? I hope I've asked that question right.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. I think I've got better at editing, and I think I used to be more precious about my work, and I used to also be a bit lazy about editing it. Like, I do spell checky type edit, and I'd give it a read through, and I think, oh, that's good enough. And if no one wants to take me on this, then they just don't see my brilliant writing. And actually, I've realised that you can't get too possessive over certain things. If you work with your editor, you can make something even better. And it's really nice having that feedback and that outside voice telling you, instead of just saying, oh, it's really good, which is what your family might say. They say, yeah, I like this, but have you thought, this bit comes off a bit anticlimactic or something, can you? And so not being precious about it, learning to really push it and get it as good as you possibly can without feeling that you'd failed the first time, I guess, is something that I've learned. And now, again, better at the planning now as well, and better at doing it, but also giving myself space within that plan still to surprise myself, because a lot of the things that happen in my books that are maybe the best bits pop in without me really knowing they're going to be there. The whole bus incident in Perfect on Paper was just random, and it changed the whole course of the book. So I'm not sure if there's anything much to extract out of that, but that's I'm definitely learning how to do it more efficiently, to get a better first draft, and then to enjoy the editing process more.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. So before we finish off, do you want to let people know how they can keep in touch with you and what's going on with your books?
Sure. So I'm on Instagram and Twitter, and on both places I'm at Jill+5, that's Jill with a G. And I've got a website, gillianharvey.com, and all the information's there. So, and then you can email me if you want to ask any questions. I'm quite happy to be contacted.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. It's been great to talk to you again. And I've enjoyed reading both of your books. Certainly was able to relate a lot to a lot of things in it, and it was good to have a little bit of a laugh about some of the things.
Oh,
And yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading your next book. And also thanks to everyone else who joined in and the questions that were asked.
thank you. Yeah.
So thanks
Awesome.
everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.